Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Ukraine peace talks take place in Riyadh between the US and Russia. Thousands of protesters are arrested on the streets of Turkey as Istanbul's mayor faces corruption charges. Israel strikes a target at hospital, killing a senior Hamas leader. And Canada goes to the polls. Newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney calls a snap election just 9 days in the job. To our top story, and talks between the US and Russia are taking place in Saudi Arabia today as the two countries discuss a potential peace deal in Ukraine. Ukraine met with the US in Riyadh over the weekend, with one member of the Ukrainian delegation revealing talks were constructive and meaningful. Today, Grigor Karizan, chair of Moscow's Foreign Affairs Committee, told Russian state media negotiations were going on creatively. The talks are taking place following drone attacks from both Russia and Ukraine over the weekend, with 3 people killed in Kyiv and 4 military helicopters destroyed in Russia. The US and Ukraine will hold another round of talks following today's discussions between the US and Ukraine. Let's go live to Istanbul now to speak to John Kavulich, Senior Editor for Outcome Modelling Analysis at Issue Insight. John, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Today's discussions will include the safety of shipping in the Black Sea. Can you tell us why the Black Sea is so important to today's negotiations?
When the Russian Federation began its attack on the 24th of February 2022, part of it was targeted toward Odessa, the main Black Sea seaport, along with other smaller ports along the Ukraine territories of the Black Sea. And then there were issues relating to the movement of agricultural commodities from Ukraine through the Black Sea, through the Bosphorus, and then to markets onward. The Russian Federation started basically threatening and then attacking the shipping, the commercial shipping. And so President Erdogan, the United Nations General Secretary Gutierrez, they put together the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And what that was designed to bring Russia, to bring Ukraine together and basically say, okay, we're gonna create this imaginary straight line from the port of Odessa and the near ports to the Bosphorus. And that worked for a while, but then President Putin decided he didn't want to do it anymore. And the attacks then continued on commercial vessels, not that much, but it was the threat that made a lot of commercial vessels not want to take a chance because the insurance companies were saying, we're not going to insure them. The Ukrainian government got creative and they said, okay, well, first we'll put together an insurance pot. So we'll self-insure. So we'll put a pot of money together. We'll take care of any loss with the vessels. So that solved one problem. The second was the routing. So rather than this straight line, what the ships have done since is hug the coast of Hungary and Romania and Slovakia and on their way to the Bosphorus. And so it's, it adds some time, it's less efficient, but it works. And so the problem is now that there's no longer this Black Sea Grain Initiative to really negotiate. So what both parties have moved to is, okay, what about just let's not blow things up in the Black Sea?
John, I just wanted to ask you there, the US and Ukraine will hold another round of talks. We're hearing this today following today's discussions between America and Russia. In your opinion, do you think this is a positive sign that they are making headway in these negotiations?
Well, you certainly can look at this from the perspective of, are the last 2 days better than President Zelensky's 20 minutes in the Oval Office a month ago? And the answer is yes. When the Ukrainians are talking to the US on Sunday, And then the U.S. is talking to the Russians on Monday, and then the U.S. is talking to the Ukrainians on Tuesday, even though this is at what's called the technical level. So these are basically the level below the foreign ministers, below the secretaries. However, the Ukrainian delegation is led by their defense minister. So that shows that they're trying to make something happen, and he does have the credibility and he does have the authority to make some decisions. So that's really good. The fact that they're meeting again tomorrow is hopefully going to be building on the meetings that were held today between the U.S. and the Russians. So this is all about, in diplomatic parlance, confidence-building measures. Basically, what both governments do, the Russians and the Ukrainians, they make lists, and it's basically what's most important at the top, and then you go all the way down to least important. But then when it comes to these talks, you flip those lists and you start with what's easiest, and then you work your way toward what's hardest. So it's building confidence to get rid of the small issues, make it so that both sides are getting more and more comfortable, and then you try for the final, which is President Trump wanting a ceasefire, meaning just stop shooting.
Yes, indeed. And last time when Trump and Putin spoke on the phone last week, a quick ceasefire deal seemed unlikely, further away than we actually thought. The Trump administration are now hoping a truce could be called by Easter. That's not far away. It's the 20th of April. Do you think this is at all possible? Remember, Donald Trump said he would stop this war in his first day in office.
As he actually said during the campaign, he'd stop it in 24 hours, and then he said he'd stop it even before he became president, so during the transition. And then more recently, he's come out and said he was basically being sarcastic. Putting that aside, is this doable? It is. President Trump has invested a lot in it. However, what he does well is a normal politician gets invested in an issue, and then they become hostage to the issue, where they can't maneuver because now they're hostage to whatever happens. It's good, it's bad, it sinks, it swims. President Trump has, during his first term and thus far, it's incredible when I say this, I mean, he's only 60 days into the term. It feels like he's been there for years. But he is able to walk away. He's able to get disgusted, or there's a new shiny object that attracts his attention, and he walks away. He's sort of done that with the mineral deal. The mineral deal with Ukraine, it was, 50 billion, 100 billion, 500 billion. Oh, it was $1 trillion. But then when
John Kavulich, Senior Editor for Outcome and Modelling Analysis at Issue Insight. I think we're having a few technical problems there, but thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. 199 migrants deported from the US have arrived in Venezuela. Footage showed young men in sweatsuits walking off the plane, some of them smiling and clapping. The flight comes after Venezuela announced an agreement with Washington to resume repatriation flights from the US. A US delegation led by Usha Vance, the wife of Vice President J.D. Vance, will travel to Greenland this week. The visit follows President Trump's continued threats to annex the Danish territory. White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Energy Secretary Chris Wright will also join the group. South Korea's Constitutional Court has reinstated Prime Minister Han Duck-soo as acting president. Han was impeached just 2 weeks into his role, and Deputy Premier Cho Sang-mok has led the country since. The East Asian democracy is going through severe political turmoil ever since Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law in December last year. And the CEO of the British National Grid claims Heathrow Airport had enough power from other substations despite Friday's shutdown. Thousands of flights to and from London's biggest airport were affected last week after a fire consumed an electricity substation powering the key hub. Responding to the claims, a Heathrow spokesperson said it would not have been possible for the airport to operate uninterrupted. Now, 1,133 people have been arrested in Turkey after 5 days of protests, according to the country's government. The demonstrations broke out when Istanbul's mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, a rival of President Erdogan, was held on Wednesday over corruption charges. İmamoğlu says the charges are politically motivated and accusation Erdogan does deny. We can now speak to Cengiz Firat, a retired ambassador from the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Good evening to you, Ambassador. Thank you for joining me. So in 2016, there was a failed coup attempt in Turkey. What has sparked the latest democratic movement against President Erdogan?
Good evening from Turkey. Well, the latest developments are definitely very, very important, and it's been on the news everywhere around the world. One thing that could be said is that it's the first time since the Gazan protests, which took place in 2013, that we see such mass protestation going on around the country. The Mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, of course, as you know, was arrested and on corruption charges, and pending the result of the court hearings, he will be taken off duty from the position. Now, when you look at what the opposition is saying, the CHP, the main opposition party to which Ekrem İmamoğlu belongs, they're saying that this is a politically motivated development because they see, and most of the commentators around the world seem to see the same thing, that President Erdogan is getting rid of his political rivals, in a sense, taking them off the political agenda where they can no longer be a rival to him in the next general election. As Mr. İmamoğlu has been able to beat his political rivals in Istanbul and claim the mayor's position in the biggest city of Turkey, he was a natural candidate to become the next, he was poised to become the next candidate from the CHP for the presidential elections. And the CHP seems to think, and Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu seems to think, and he says this, that everything is done in such a political way that on the 23rd, which was yesterday, as the party was about to inform that he would be the next presidential candidate from the CHP, this whole process of corruption charges, of links to terrorism, etc., was brought about as a political move rather than a natural progression of things in politics. So what has happened since then? We've seen, of course, for the past 4 or 5 days, mass demonstrations, mainly by students, to be honest, and mainly in the big cities, because there's a ban on demonstrations. So it's the students who are taking the forefront on this. And they're not as big as the Gezi protests. And when you look at the Conservative Party, they're not talking about it too much. Their supporters are just watching all the developments. So in reality, what's happening on the ground is that there are protests, but they're mainly student protests. But what's very important, much more important than the student protests, is what happened yesterday. Yesterday, the CIA actually kind of ballot by themselves to choose.
Ambassador, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but we seem to be having a few technical problems. Just let me know if you can hear me on the line, please.
I can hear you.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, great. It seems, yes, I can hear you now. I just wanted to pick up on something that happened yesterday. Millions of people actually went out to vote, and for Ekrem Imamoglu. He was a real fierce communicator. Why is he so popular, especially with the younger generation? Because what you said to me, most of the people that are out demonstrating are students.
Well, the reason why it's students is because there's a protest. Yesterday, able to go and vote candidate, going to elect their candidate, who's going to be opposed to the president, who's going to be the candidate for the CHP in the next election. CHP, mind that's 1.6 million members, and yesterday over 15 million.
Ambassador, I'm so sorry. We're actually just going to have to end it there. We're having a few technical problems and we're struggling to get you on the line. But thank you so much for joining me. I hope I have you back on soon. Cengiz Firat, a retired ambassador from the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much. Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Some Europeans are reconsidering their travel plans as a result of President Trump's actions. That's according to a number of travel agents across the continent. A change in US-EU relations, global trade wars and tougher immigration policies are believed to be behind the change. Europeans spent $155 billion travelling to the US in 2023. The number of Western European visitors has fallen 1% year-on-year in February. Now, the French actor Gérard Depardieu appeared in court in Paris earlier today, facing accusations of sexual assault. The 76-year-old is alleged to have groped a 54-year-old set dresser and a 34-year-old assistant director during production of Les Voleurs. The actor denies the charges. Pope Francis has made a return to the Vatican after a 5-week stay in hospital for double pneumonia. A car carrying the pontiff travelled through Rome, accompanied by police. It's the 88-year-old's first public appearance since mid-February. And Disney's live-action version of Snow White has topped the North American box office, despite a number of very critical reviews. The film has taken an estimated $87.3 million during its opening weekend. That is, however, below expectations for a movie which reportedly cost more than $270 million to make. An Israeli airstrike on a hospital in Gaza has killed a senior Hamas leader and also their aide. The group's head of financial affairs, Ishmael Barum, was targeted at Nasser Hospital, the main medical facility in Khan Yunis. Israel said the planned attack took place following an extensive intelligence gathering process. Hamas said many others, including medical personnel, were injured in that very strike. I'm now joined by the former Israeli government spokesman, Elon Levy. Thank you so much for joining me, Elon. First of all, more than 50,000 people have now been killed in Gaza since the Israel-Hamas war. That's according to Gaza's health ministry. This is a real stark number. Does Israel have no other choice but to keep bombarding Gaza?
Possible, I would be very skeptical of the numbers that are being provided by the Hamas terror regime, which, as everyone knows, doesn't distinguish between civilians and combatants. But what really matters is who is being killed. Every civilian death is a tragedy, and there should be as few of those as possible. But every Hamas militant death, well, that's exactly what Israel is trying to achieve in this war that Hamas started. Hamas invaded on October 7th, fired thousands of rockets into Israel, took over 250 Israelis hostage, and Israel says that this war has to end with the total destruction of Hamas's military machine, because otherwise Hamas will do this over and over again. That is what will happen if Israel does not succeed in destroying Hamas. And it's tragic that civilians are being killed, but civilians are being killed because Hamas deliberately fights out of civilian buildings, in civilian dress, out of a deliberate strategy to try to use its own civilians as human shields or human sacrifices. And that sick strategy has to stop.
2 Hamas leaders were killed in Israeli airstrikes over the weekend. How significant is this for Israel?
Very significant. Israel has been clear that every Hamas terrorist is a dead man walking, because the Hamas terror regime that perpetrated the October 7th massacre is threatening to do it again and again. Of the 20 members of Hamas's Politburo on the eve of the war, over 11 of those have now been killed, including Ismail Barhoum, who was hiding inside a hospital. And Israel is very clear, this war has to end, and it has to end when Hamas is defeated, or when Hamas surrenders and releases all of the hostages. Because Israel cannot allow the Hamas terror regime to continue governing the Gaza Strip. This isn't another round of conflict. This war cannot end with Hamas still in power in Gaza, or it will try to invade Israel again, perpetrate another October 7th massacre again, and we're going to be stuck in the same cycle of violence that we're desperately trying to get out of.
Tens of thousands of protesters have actually taken to the streets of Israel in recent days. They say Netanyahu is only motivated by political gain. They want the hostages home, and they have been demonstrating since Israel started strikes on Gaza again. What is your analysis of the situation and the unrest in Israel?
There is a huge amount of disagreement and debate in Israel about the way that this war is being handled. But I think there's actually a lot more unity within Israeli society than these images suggest. There are people who want Israel to pay any price, pay any ransom to bring the hostages back now. But everyone in Israel agrees that the Hamas terror regime has to be brought down later. No one in Israel thinks that we can continue to live next to the Hamas terror regime as our neighbor. They want to get the hostages out now and destroy the Hamas terror regime later. So the debate inside Israel is not about the goals of the war that Hamas started. It's about the sequencing and how we should go about achieving those goals that everyone agrees on. This war has to end with Hamas no longer governing the Gaza Strip, with all the hostages home, and with no more threat coming from Gaza to Israel.
Hamas is still holding 59 hostages, with 24 of them thought to still be alive. Do you have any idea on the statistics of the hostages at the moment since Israel started its offensive again?
Yeah, Hamas is still holding 59 hostages. They've been stuck for over 530 days since the October 7th massacre. We believe 24 of the hostages are still alive. The rest have already been murdered. And that's just a sign of how evil the Hamas regime is, that it's now holding onto their bodies for a ransom. Hamas just released a video with proof of life of 2 of the hostages. We know from the hostages who are coming back that they are being starved, that they're shackled, that many of them have untreated wounds from October 7th. And Israel is demanding Hamas has to release the hostages immediately and unconditionally. And there is no excuse for holding on to these poor people who were snatched out of their beds 18 months ago.
On Sunday, Netanyahu spoke with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Egypt has also floated a new proposal aimed at restoring the Gaza ceasefire deal. Is there any signal on when these negotiations are going to restart, and if Israel is prepared to be involved?
Well, Israel has found itself having to resume the military campaign because Hamas was refusing to release the hostages. Israel wanted to extend the ceasefire. It agreed to 2 American proposals to extend the ceasefire. We'll carry on the ceasefire, and in exchange, Hamas will give back hostages. And Hamas resumed. So Israel found itself resuming military action because otherwise Hamas was getting a ceasefire for nothing. And Israel is saying it will be willing to go back to negotiations on going back to the ceasefire if Hamas is serious about releasing hostages, not if it's just trying to drag out the talks to buy time and remain in power in Gaza, plotting for the next round of war.
Elon Levy, former Israeli government spokesperson, thank you for joining me.
Anytime.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. Oil prices climbed as investors weigh the impact of fresh US sanctions on Iranian exports against talks to end the war in Ukraine, which could increase supply of Russian crude to global markets. Brent and WTI benchmarks both advanced on Monday. US President Donald Trump also provided traders with some hope that previously announced tariffs in April may not be as much as previously feared. DNA testing company 23andMe has filed for bankruptcy protection and announced that its co-founder and CEO has resigned with immediate effect. The company will now attempt to sell itself under the supervision of a court. Founded in 2006, the company went public in 2021, but has never actually turned a profit. Turning to sports news now, Lando Norris says he's nervous and excited by the prospect of battling teammate Oscar Piastri for the F1 driver's title. Pole sitter Piastri led Norris in a McLaren 1-2 at the Chinese Grand Prix on Sunday, a week after Norris finished atop in the season opener over in Australia. And Novak Djokovic has said chasing the world #1 ranking is not his main objective anymore after winning the Miami Open on Sunday. The 24-year-old Grand Slam champion said he will happily take major tournament victories over the top spot. Djokovic has spent more than 400 weeks at #1 and now sits 5th in the rankings. Canada will go to the polls on the 28th of April after a snap election was called by the newly appointed Prime Minister Mark Carney. Carney, only 9 days in the job, will go head-to-head with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre as the country battles a trade war with US President Donald Trump, who has referred to Canada as the 51st state of America. Here's how Mark Carney did break the news.
I've just requested that the Governor-General dissolve Parliament and call an election for April 28th. And she has agreed. We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty. Our response must be to build a strong economy and a more secure Canada.
I'm now joined in the studio by journalist Michael Jabri-Pickett. Thank you so much for joining me, Michael. A pleasure to have you on set. So we actually just heard from Mark Carney there. He appears to be pinning winning hopes on securing Canada from Donald Trump's tariffs. Is this a wide move for Carney, or is he kind of pigeonholing himself a little bit?
I would say it's the only move. This election is about tariffs and Trump. If you're in Canada and you are trying to decide who you're going to vote for, this is the only issue. And they're so intertwined that 100%, if he's going to be elected as the Prime Minister, then he definitely has to pigeonhole himself.
Very interesting. Carney has also warned Trump about the impact of tariffs on Canada's economy. Of course, we know him in his former life as the governor of the Bank of England. Do you think he is the best person to actually negotiate a good deal for Canada with Donald Trump?
So traditionally, Canadians either vote for Tories or Liberals. So you're either going to have a Conservative government or a Liberal government. And in this particular case, what you have to remember is that Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of the opposition, of the Tories, he was first elected when he was 25. He's 45. He's a career politician. So what is actually, in some circles, going to hurt Mark Carney is that he's not a politician. I think in his dealings with Trump, it's going to help him because he is going to bring real-world experience. And as we know, Donald Trump is about the art of the deal. And I think Carney's the person that's going to be able to best deal with a fellow businessman.
Yeah, because both of them are traditionally have a business background, so we'll see how Trump reacts to that. Carney is currently unelected. We just spoke a little bit there, taking over from Justin Trudeau, of course. Can he win this election and capitalise on the Liberal Party's success in the last few months? You sort of said there that's where things could be a little bit difficult because he's 60. He's not a career politician. This is his first sort of hurrah into it.
I would say yes. And the reason is because 18 months ago, there's no way that a Liberal leader would be reelected. But the last few months, there's been a shift, and the public is not so enthralled with Justin Trudeau. He had been in power almost 10 years. And what happened is you had Trump come to power, you had Justin Trudeau stepping down, and you had Mark Carney winning the Liberal leadership race. And that perfect storm created a moment, I think, that someone like Mark Carney, with his experience as Governor of Bank of England and Governor of Bank of Canada, I think he's perfectly positioned to capitalize on something that the other traditional politicians would not be able to capitalize on.
Coming in with fresh eyes, I guess. I wanted to talk to you about Canadianos. I hope I've said that right. They've become a regular in coffee shops across Canada. And I found this quite interesting because how are Canadians reacting to Donald Trump and his administration wanting Canada to become the 51st state? Canada and America, traditional allies, so close. You know, what are they thinking?
So the national sport of Canada is ice hockey.
Which you played this morning.
Which I did play this morning.
Everyone know.
And for all the other Canadians out there, I would say actually it's hockey, but because we are speaking to a global audience, it has to be ice hockey. And there's an expression called elbows up. Now, what elbows up means is that when you are going to be fighting for the puck, you need to make sure that you keep a fair distance so that the other players know that they can't get too close to you. So if your elbows are up, you're prepared to defend yourself, but you're not necessarily being the aggressor. That has become a rallying cry across Canada. You have had demonstrations in different cities throughout the country where that cry for elbows up is coming in. And what's happening is that Donald Trump might be motivating Canadian voters better than any Canadian politician because he's brought the country together. It's almost an existential threat right now. And what he's doing is he's making Canadians realize that the one issue that I will stand by every other Canadian with is the fact that our country has to remain our country. An Angus Reid poll recently found that 91% of Canadians are not in favor of becoming the 51st state.
That is a really high number. But I just want to put one other thing to you. If Trump tariffs do come in at what he's threatening for Canada, what does this really mean for industry in both America and Canada? Will they not both suffer from tariffs, especially when it comes to the autos?
They definitely will suffer. A very interesting statistic is that 80% of goods that Canada exports goes south of the border. So it will definitely hurt the Canadian economy. But what you're seeing in liquor stores and in grocery stores is that either the proprietor is taking down American goods so they're no longer available, or there's such a push for Canadians to buy Canadian goods that I think that there will be a willingness to suffer for a certain period of time. How long, I don't know. But you also have to remember that when it comes to some of the energy needs, the U.S. gets a ridiculous amount of its energy needs from Canada. And I think that the U.S. will suffer and Canada will suffer. And I also think that at a certain point, this is where someone like Mark Carney will be able to come in and say, we need to cut a deal. And I think that Trump would also recognize that he needs to cut a deal. And I do think cooler heads would prevail, but I'm hopeful that it's not going to get to that point.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. That is journalist Michael Jabri-Pickett. Once again, thank you very much for joining me on set. And a reminder of our top stories. Ukraine peace talks take place in Riyadh between the US and Russia. Thousands of protesters are arrested on the streets of Turkey as Istanbul's mayor faces corruption charges. Israeli strikes target a hospital, killing a senior Hamas leader. And Canada goes to the polls. Newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney calls a snap election just 9 days in the job. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Counterpoint with Melinda Nerfro is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you for joining me.